I came home for lunch on a Tuesday. My wife Linda was in the pool with my son-in-law Michael. I saw the lubricant bottle on her nightstand. Silently, I swapped the liquid for industrial glue and locked the door. An hour later, the firefighters couldn't stop laughing. I never thought 30 years of marriage could shatter in the space of a lunch break. My name is Robert Smith, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to predict its patterns. Tuesday mornings meant oatmeal and black coffee. Wednesday evenings brought Linda's book club meetings. Thursdays were reserved for yard work and quiet dinners at the kitchen table. Our life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, or so I believed. That Tuesday started like any other. Linda kissed my cheek goodbye as she headed out for her job at the insurance office, her perfume lingering in the kitchen long after her car disappeared down Maple Street. At 58, she still carried herself with confidence, still knew exactly where she belonged in the world. I'd always envied that certainty. I'd been retired for 2 years now, after spending 41 years as a postal supervisor. My pension of $2,200 a month, combined with Linda's salary of $3,800, kept us comfortable in our modest 2-story home. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention from the neighbors. That was how I preferred it. Or at least how I thought I preferred it. The morning dragged on with its usual tasks. I watered Linda's rose garden out front, sorted through a stack of bills at the kitchen table, and tried to fix the squeaky hinge on the garage door that had been bothering me for weeks. By 11:30, my stomach was growling, and I remembered the leftover meatloaf Linda had prepared the night before. A quick drive home for lunch seemed like the perfect break from my aimless retirement routine. When my Uncle Edmund had passed away 6 years ago, he'd left me some money. I'd mentioned it to Linda in passing, a little inheritance to set aside for retirement, and she'd nodded, asked if it was enough to maybe take a cruise someday, then moved on to other topics. I never corrected her assumption that it was just a modest amount, maybe $50,000 or $60,000. I'm not sure why I didn't. Some instinct told me to keep that information close, to see what kind of people surrounded me when they thought I had nothing special to offer but myself. Now, looking back, I'm grateful for that instinct. I pulled into our driveway at exactly 12:15 p.m. and immediately noticed something odd. Linda's Honda was parked in its usual spot beside the house. Strange. She typically ate lunch at her desk, always complaining about having too much work to leave the office. Maybe she'd come home sick, I thought. Maybe she needed to lie down. I used my key quietly, not wanting to wake her if she was resting. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't quite identify. The living room was empty, but I could hear muffled sounds coming from the direction of our backyard pool. Linda had been after me for months to use that pool more often. "We spend all that money maintaining it, Robert, and you never even get in," she'd say, exasperation creeping into her voice. Perhaps she'd decided to take her own advice and was enjoying a midday swim. I moved through the kitchen toward the sliding glass door that led to our patio, but something stopped me before I reached it. Through the window, partially obscured by the curtain, I could see 2 figures in the water. Linda was there, just as I'd expected, but she wasn't alone. Michael Davidson, our son-in-law, was with her. At first, my mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Perhaps he'd come to check on Linda. Perhaps there was some family emergency involving our daughter Jessica, and he'd rushed over to tell her mother. But as I stood there, frozen behind the kitchen curtains, the truth became unavoidably, devastatingly clear. They weren't just swimming. Linda's arms were wrapped around Michael's neck. Her legs were around his waist. They moved together in the water with an intimacy that made my chest tighten and my hands start to tremble. This wasn't casual. This wasn't innocent. This was deliberate, passionate, and it was destroying everything I thought I knew about my life. I watched my wife of 30 years kiss the man who had married our only daughter 8 years ago. I watched her touch him the way she used to touch me, back when we still touched at all. I watched Michael's hands explore her body with a familiarity that spoke of practice, of repetition, of time invested in learning what pleased her. My legs felt weak. I gripped the kitchen counter, the granite cold against my palm, and tried to make sense of what I was witnessing. How long had this been going on? How many times had they met like this while I puttered around the house, oblivious and trusting? The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined possible. It wasn't just Linda's infidelity that wounded me. It was Michael's. This was the man who sat at our dinner table every Sunday, the man who called me dad when he wanted to borrow tools, the man who had promised to love and honor our daughter Jessica. This was the man who shook my hand with the same hands that were now caressing my wife. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I needed to decide what to do with this terrible knowledge that was burning a hole through my chest. Walking mechanically through our house, I found myself in our bedroom. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning when I'd made the bed and straightened Linda's jewelry on the dresser. But now I saw it all differently. Now I saw it as the stage for her deception, for her calculated betrayal. That's when I noticed the small bottle on Linda's nightstand. At first glance, I thought it was hand lotion. But as I picked it up, I realized what it was: personal lubricant, the expensive kind, the kind that Linda had claimed we didn't need anymore, back when we still shared any physical intimacy at all. She had prepared for this. She had planned for Michael to come here, to our bed, to our sacred space. The calculation of it made me feel nauseated. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake. This was premeditated, organized, scheduled. I stood there holding that bottle, and something inside me shifted. The hurt began to transform into something harder, something colder. If Linda wanted to play games, if she wanted to treat our marriage as something disposable, then perhaps it was time she learned that actions have consequences. I walked to the garage where I kept my workshop supplies. Among the various bottles and containers on my workbench, I found what I was looking for: industrial strength adhesive, the kind used for permanent bonds, the kind that warned on the label about skin contact and the need for immediate medical attention if misused. My hands were steady as I worked. I carefully emptied the lubricant bottle into the garage sink, watching the clear liquid swirl down the drain. Then I refilled it with the industrial adhesive. The consistency was similar enough that it would pass a casual inspection, but the effects would be dramatically, unforgettably different. I placed the bottle back exactly where I had found it on Linda's nightstand. Then I quietly locked the bedroom door from the inside before slipping out through the bathroom that connected to the hallway. If they wanted privacy for their encounter, I would ensure they got more than they bargained for. I returned to the kitchen and sat at our breakfast table, the same table where Linda and I had shared coffee that morning, where she had kissed my cheek goodbye before heading off to work, or so I had thought. Through the window, I could see them still in the pool, still wrapped in their passionate embrace. Part of me wanted to storm outside and confront them immediately. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and leave forever. But a larger part of me wanted to see how this would play out, wanted to witness the consequences of their choices unfold naturally. I made myself a sandwich with the leftover meatloaf and waited. I knew it wouldn't be long before they moved their activities indoors, before they discovered my little modification to their plans. As I ate, I thought about the man I had been just an hour earlier, that Robert Smith had been naive, trusting, perhaps willfully blind to the cracks in his marriage. But that man was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the people you love most are the ones most capable of destroying you. The irony wasn't lost on me that Linda and Michael thought they were the ones in control, that they were the ones with secrets and power. They had no idea that I had secrets of my own. Secrets that would soon change everything they thought they knew about our family. But for now, I would wait. I would be patient, and I would let them discover, in the most uncomfortable way possible, that betrayal always comes with a price. The clock on the microwave read 12:52 p.m. It wouldn't be much longer now. Exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes after I made my discovery, the screaming started. It began as muffled shouts from upstairs, then rapidly escalated into genuine panic. Linda's voice, high and desperate, "Help! Somebody help!" Michael's deeper tone, cursing in a way that would have made our daughter Jessica blush if she could hear him. The sound of frantic movement, furniture scraping against the floor. Then Linda's voice again, this time pleading, "Call 911! Call 911!" I finished the last bite of my sandwich, wiped my hands carefully on a napkin, and calmly walked to the phone. When the operator answered, I let genuine concern color my voice. "I need an ambulance at 1527 Maple Street. I think there's been some kind of accident. My wife is screaming upstairs." Within 12 minutes, our quiet suburban street was transformed into a circus. A fire truck, an ambulance, and 2 police cars lined the curb. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion like moths to flame. Mrs. Patterson from next door clutched her bathrobe and craned her neck to get a better view. Mr. Wilson stood on his front lawn with his arms crossed, shaking his head. I met the paramedics at the front door, playing the role of the confused, worried husband to perfection. I just got home from running errands, I explained, wringing my hands appropriately. I heard shouting from upstairs. The bedroom door is locked and they're not responding to my calls. Lieutenant Rodriguez, a stocky man in his 40s with a face that suggested he'd seen everything, nodded to his team. "We'll handle it, sir. Please step back." The fire department made quick work of our bedroom door. The crash of the battering ram echoed through the house, and I watched from the hallway as they rushed inside. What they found would become neighborhood legend within the week. Linda and Michael were indeed stuck together, courtesy of the industrial adhesive I had substituted for their intended lubricant. They had managed to separate themselves from each other partially, but not without leaving Michael with several square inches of skin adhered to various parts of Linda's anatomy, and vice versa. Both of them were wrapped in bedsheets, their faces masks of pain and mortification. The look of pure, undiluted humiliation on both their faces almost made the entire ordeal worthwhile. "How did this happen?" Lieutenant Rodriguez asked, his voice carefully professional even as I noticed the corners of his mouth twitching. His team was working to free the trapped couple using specialized solvents, and I could hear one of the younger firefighters barely suppressing laughter in the hallway. Linda, wrapped in a sheet and trying desperately to maintain some dignity, shot me a look of pure venom. "The bottle," she managed through gritted teeth. "Someone must have switched the contents." "Switched?" I asked, allowing confusion to cloud my features. "Who would do such a thing? And how would someone get into our house to tamper with personal items?" Michael, red-faced and focused on the paramedic treating his adhesive burns, muttered something about accidents and bad manufacturing, but even he didn't sound convinced. The paramedics exchanged glances. Jenny Walsh, the lead paramedic, a competent-looking woman in her mid-40s, spoke up. "We're going to need to transport both of you to General Hospital. Those chemical burns need proper treatment, and we need to make sure there's no permanent damage." As Linda was helped onto a stretcher, still partially covered by the sheet, she grabbed my arm. Her fingernails dug into my skin hard enough to leave marks, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We need to talk." I nodded solemnly, the picture of a concerned husband. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll follow the ambulance to the hospital." But I didn't follow the ambulance. Instead, I waited until the street cleared of emergency vehicles and curious neighbors before going back inside my house. I needed time to think, to plan my next moves, and to savor the small victory I had just achieved. The bedroom was a disaster. Chemical solvents had stained the carpet. The bed sheets were ruined. The entire room would need to be aired out for hours. But it was fitting, somehow. The scene of Linda's betrayal had been properly desecrated. I was sitting in my living room, considering my options and wondering what would come next, when Jessica's car pulled into the driveway. My daughter burst through the front door without knocking, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She was still wearing her work scrubs from the veterinary clinic where she worked as a technician. "Dad, what the hell happened here?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Michael called me from the hospital. He said there was some kind of accident with Mom, but he wouldn't explain what kind of accident requires chemical burn treatment and a fire department response." I studied my daughter carefully. Jessica had always been closer to her mother than to me, and she had developed an unfortunate tendency to side with Linda in any family dispute. But she was also my only child, and despite everything, I loved her. "Your mother and Michael were injured in what appears to be an industrial adhesive accident," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm not entirely sure how it happened. I came home from running errands and found them in distress." Jessica stared at me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Michael was here, in the middle of the day? Why?" "I assumed he had come to check on your mother. Perhaps she had called him because she wasn't feeling well." "Dad." Jessica sat down across from me, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when explaining medical procedures to difficult pet owners. "Michael doesn't just randomly come by during the day to check on Mom. He was supposed to be at the construction site. He left work to come here. And now they're both at the hospital with adhesive burns. What really happened?" The moment had arrived sooner than I'd expected, but I was prepared for it. "Jessica," I said quietly, "I think you need to ask your husband and your mother that question." 3 days after the hospital incident, I discovered that my family's betrayal ran deeper than adultery. I was sitting in my home office, a small room off the kitchen where I paid bills and managed our modest finances, when the doorbell rang on Friday morning. Through the window, I could see a woman in a business suit carrying a leather briefcase. Her car, a sleek black sedan with the logo of a local senior living facility on the door, suggested she wasn't selling encyclopedias. "Mr. Smith?" she asked when I opened the door. Her smile was professionally warm, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "My name is Dr. Amanda Cole. I'm from Sunrise Senior Living Solutions. I believe your family has been in contact with us regarding your care needs." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. "I think there's been a mistake," I said carefully. "I haven't contacted any senior living facilities." Dr. Cole consulted her tablet, frowning slightly. "According to our records, your daughter Jessica Smith Davidson initiated contact with us 2 weeks ago. She indicated that you were experiencing some cognitive decline and that the family was exploring residential care options for your safety and well-being." 2 weeks ago, before the pool incident, before I had discovered Linda's affair. They had been planning to warehouse me even before their secret was exposed. "I see," I managed, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "And what exactly did my daughter tell you about my condition?" Dr. Cole looked uncomfortable but continued reading from her tablet. "She mentioned that you've been having memory issues, confusion about finances, and some aggressive episodes. She was particularly concerned about your ability to continue living independently and safely." Aggressive episodes, memory issues, financial confusion. They had built an entire narrative around my supposed unfitness, creating a foundation for removing me from my own life, creating a story that would justify locking me away while they continued their affair in peace. "May I ask who else has been involved in these discussions?" I asked, my tone still carefully polite. "Well, your wife Linda Smith also attended our facility tour last week. She seemed very concerned about your welfare and asked detailed questions about our memory care unit." Dr. Cole paused, glancing at her tablet again. She was particularly interested in our security features and protocols for residents who might try to leave the facility. Linda had toured the facility. While I was puttering around this house, believing I was living a quiet retirement with a faithful wife, she was shopping for a place to stash me so she could continue her affair with my son-in-law without interference. "And the financial arrangements?" I pressed, though I already suspected what was coming. Dr. Cole shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Smith indicated that you have a modest pension and some savings, but that the family would need to supplement the costs. Our monthly rate is $4,700, so additional family support would be necessary to cover the full expenses." $4,700 a month, nearly twice my pension. They planned to drain our savings to pay for my imprisonment, while Linda and Michael enjoyed their newfound freedom. Or perhaps they planned to sell the house entirely, dividing the proceeds while I languished in a memory care unit, drugged and docile. "I appreciate you coming by, Dr. Cole," I said, forcing a smile. "But I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. I'm not interested in assisted living at this time. In fact, I'm quite certain I won't be needing your services at all." "Of course, Mr. Smith. These decisions are never easy," she said, her voice taking on the soothing tone I imagined she used with actual dementia patients. "But I should mention that your daughter seemed quite determined. She specifically asked about our procedures for residents who might be resistant to the transition." Resistant to the transition. They had even planned for my objections, for my refusal to go quietly into the cage they were building for me. After Dr. Cole left, I sat in my office staring at the financial documents spread across my desk, bank statements, investment records, pension paperwork, all the mundane evidence of a life lived responsibly. But none of it told the real story of my financial situation. The real story was locked in a safety deposit box across town, in documents I had never shared with Linda or Jessica, documents that would change everything they thought they knew about Robert Smith. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Michael's number. I let it ring 3 times before answering, making him wait. "Hello, Michael," I said, my voice neutral. "Dad?" "Robert," he corrected himself quickly. "Look, I think we need to clear the air about what happened on Tuesday. Do we? Jessica is really upset. She's not sleeping, barely eating. This whole misunderstanding is tearing her apart, and I hate seeing her like this. Misunderstanding? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. Is that what we're calling it? Michael's voice took on a pleading tone. Look, I know how it looked, but Linda called me because she was having some kind of panic attack. She asked me to come over because she didn't want to worry you. When I got here, she was already in the pool trying to calm down. I got in to help her and things just got confused. It was a remarkably creative story, I had to admit. Panic attacks, confusion, innocent misunderstandings. Michael had clearly spent the past 3 days crafting a narrative that cast him and Linda as innocent victims of circumstance. And the bedroom? I asked quietly. How did you both end up there if Linda was having a panic attack? A long pause. I could hear Michael breathing on the other end of the line, searching for the right words. She said she needed to lie down. I was just helping her upstairs when the accident happened with the adhesive. The accident? Yes. Obviously someone tampered with that bottle, but we don't know who or why. Maybe it was some kind of prank gone wrong, or maybe there was a manufacturing defect. I almost admired his persistence. Even with chemical burns on his body and his marriage hanging by a thread, Michael was still trying to spin the story in his favor. Michael, I said quietly, did you know that Jessica contacted an assisted living facility about me? Another long pause, this one more telling than any confession. What? Sunrise Senior Living. Jessica told them I was having cognitive problems and needed residential care. Linda even toured the facility last week. They showed her the memory care unit. I paused, letting that sink in. The representative just left my house. She had quite detailed notes about my supposed mental decline. Robert, I don't know anything about that. But his voice had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded uncomfortably close to panic. $4,700 a month, Michael. That's what it costs to warehouse an inconvenient husband and father. They were quite thorough in their planning. If Jessica called them, she was probably just worried about you. I mean, after your mother died last year, and with your retirement, maybe she thought, my mother died 12 years ago, Michael, not last year. Silence. Complete, damning silence. If you're going to lie to me, I said calmly, you should at least keep your facts straight. You just confused me with Linda's cover story, didn't you? The one she told Jessica to justify all those sick days she's been taking. I could hear Michael's breathing quicken on the other end of the line. He was realizing that his carefully constructed story was falling apart, brick by brick. Look, he said finally, his voice strained. Maybe there have been some misunderstandings on all sides. Maybe we should all sit down and talk this through like adults, work this out as a family. I think that's an excellent idea, I replied. Why don't you and Linda and Jessica come over tonight? 7 o'clock. We'll have a family meeting. Okay. Yes, that's good. We can work this out, Robert. I know we can. Michael? Yeah? Bring the paperwork. What paperwork? From Sunrise Senior Living. I'm sure you've seen it, since you and Linda and Jessica have been planning my future behind my back. Bring all of it. I want to see every document, every email, every piece of evidence of what you three have been conspiring to do. I hung up before he could respond. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, and I had preparations to make. I drove across town to First National Bank, where I had maintained a safety deposit box for the past 6 years. The contents of that box were going to reshape my family's understanding of power and control. Inside the box were documents that told a very different story about Robert Smith's financial situation. Stock certificates, property deeds, investment accounts, all stemming from an inheritance I had received after my Uncle Edmund's death in 2018. Edmund had been my mother's oldest brother, a bachelor who had spent his life quietly accumulating wealth through careful investments and frugal living. When he died at the age of 89, he left his entire estate to me, his only surviving nephew, $4,500,000. I had told Linda about the inheritance, but only in the vaguest terms. Uncle Edmund left me a little something, I'd said, enough to make retirement more comfortable. She had nodded, asked if it was enough for a cruise to Alaska someday, and then the conversation had moved on to other things. She never pressed for details, never asked to see the paperwork. I'm still not sure why I didn't volunteer the information. Some instinct for self-preservation that I hadn't fully understood at the time. Now, I was profoundly grateful for that instinct. The money had been invested conservatively, generating steady returns that had grown the initial inheritance to approximately $6,200,000. But I had continued to live on my pension, maintaining the fiction that we were a middle-class couple with modest means. I wanted to know that if people claimed to love me, they loved Robert Smith, the retired postal worker, not Robert Smith, the millionaire. Now I knew exactly how prescient that decision had been. I returned home with copies of the most important documents and spent an hour organizing them into neat folders. By 5:30, I had everything ready for the evening's confrontation. That's when Detective Ryan Brooks arrived. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 38 or 40, with the lean build of someone who ran regularly and the sharp eyes of someone who missed very little. A female officer accompanied him, Officer Jennifer Martinez, according to her name badge. "Mr. Smith," Detective Brooks said, showing me his badge, "we need to ask you some questions about the incident on Tuesday." "Of course, Detective. Please, come in." I led them to the living room and offered them seats. Detective Brooks settled into the armchair across from me while Officer Martinez remained standing by the door, her posture alert and professional. "The hospital reported the incident to us," Brooks began, pulling out a small notebook. "Industrial adhesive substituted for personal lubricant. That's not something that happens accidentally." "I wouldn't think so," I agreed. "Mrs. Smith suggested that someone may have entered your home and tampered with her belongings, but there's no sign of forced entry, no evidence that anyone broke in." "That is puzzling." Brooks studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Smith, where were you between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. on Tuesday?" "I was out running errands. I went to the hardware store to look at paint samples, then stopped by the grocery store." "Do you have receipts? Anyone who can verify that?" "I didn't buy anything at either place. I was just browsing, trying to decide what I needed." "Convenient," Brooks said, though his tone remained neutral. Officer Martinez spoke for the first time. "Mr. Smith, do you know why your wife and Mr. Davidson were together in your home that day?" "I couldn't say. You'd have to ask them." "We did ask them," Brooks said. "Their stories were interesting. Mrs. Smith claims she was having a panic attack and called Mr. Davidson for help." "Does your wife often have panic attacks?" "Not to my knowledge." "Does she often call her son-in-law instead of her husband when she needs help?" I met his gaze steadily. "Apparently she does, Detective. I'm learning all sorts of surprising things about my wife this week." Brooks leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Smith, I'm going to be direct with you. The hospital staff found the whole situation suspicious. 2 people, adhesive burns in intimate areas, a locked bedroom door. This looks like assault. If you tampered with that bottle, that's a serious crime." "I understand that, Detective." "Do you have industrial adhesive in your home?" "I have various supplies in my garage. I do home repairs and woodworking." "Would you consent to letting us search your garage?" I paused, as if considering. "Do you have a warrant, Detective?" "Not yet. But if you refuse to cooperate, that makes me wonder what you're hiding." "I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm simply exercising my rights. If you believe you have probable cause, get a warrant. Otherwise, I think we're done here." Brooks stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Smith, if you did this, if you hurt your wife and her, friend, it's going to come out. These things always do. And when they do, you'll be facing charges of assault, possibly even attempted murder if the injuries had been worse." "I understand, Detective. But right now, all you have is speculation. You don't have any evidence that I did anything wrong." "We will," Brooks said quietly. "We'll get that evidence, and when we do, I'll be back." After they left, I sat alone in my living room, my hands surprisingly steady. I knew what was coming. I knew that Brooks would eventually get his warrant, would find the adhesive bottle in my garage, would build his case. But I also knew that by the time that happened, the full story would be out, and a jury of my peers might be surprisingly sympathetic to a man who discovered his wife's affair in such a devastating way. Tonight's family meeting would be the beginning of the end. One way or another, the truth was going to come out. At exactly 7 o'clock, I heard Linda's car pull into the driveway. I'd been sitting in the living room for the past 30 minutes, the folders arranged on the coffee table in front of me like ammunition. Linda entered first, moving carefully. She was wearing loose clothing that wouldn't irritate the bandages still covering parts of her body. She looked older than her 58 years, worn down by pain and stress and the effort of maintaining her lies. When her eyes met mine, I saw something I'd rarely seen before. Fear. "Robert," she said, settling gingerly into her favorite chair, "I'm glad we're going to talk about this rationally." "Are we going to talk rationally, Linda? Are you going to tell me the truth about your relationship with Michael?" Her lips tightened into a thin line. "I've told you the truth. There is no relationship beyond family." Jessica and Michael arrived together a few minutes later. My daughter's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Michael moved like a man walking to his execution, careful of his injuries, but more careful still of my gaze. "Dad," Jessica began as soon as she sat down, her voice shaking, "I know you're upset about everything that happened, but we need to talk about what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated. "Let's start with what's best for me, Jessica. Do you think it's best for me to be placed in an assisted living facility against my will?" Jessica's face flushed. "How did you— I was just exploring options. You're getting older, and after what happened on Tuesday, I'm worried about your judgment." "My judgment?" "Dad, if you really did switch that lubricant with industrial adhesive, that's not normal behavior. That's the kind of thing that makes me worry about your mental state, about whether you're safe to live alone." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised from infancy, who had learned to walk holding my hands, who had run to me with every scraped knee and broken heart. She was sitting in my living room, in the house I had provided for her entire childhood, telling me that my mental state was questionable. "Jessica," I said quietly, "before we discuss my mental state, perhaps we should discuss your husband's relationship with your mother." "There is no relationship!" Jessica exploded, her composure finally cracking. "Why can't you get that through your head? Michael loves me. Mom loves you. This whole thing is just a horrible misunderstanding, and you're making it worse by refusing to see reason." "Then explain to me," I said, reaching for the first folder, "why Michael's cell phone records show 17 calls to your mother's personal number in the past month, calls made during work hours when he should have been at the construction site." I opened the folder and spread the papers across the coffee table. Phone records, highlighted in yellow where Michael's number appeared on Linda's bill, again and again and again. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went white. Michael stared at the floor. Linda's hands trembled as she clutched the arms of her chair. "How did you get Michael's phone records?" Linda asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The same way I got the records showing that you called in sick 12 times in the past 3 months, always on days when Michael's work schedule showed him off-site." I added another sheet to the collection. "The same way I found out about your joint visits to Sunrise Senior Living." I pulled out the brochures, the emails I'd printed from our shared computer, the notes Dr. Cole had left behind. Everything laid bare on the coffee table like evidence at a trial. Jessica stared at the documents, her hands shaking as she reached for the phone records. "This can't be true. Michael, tell him this isn't true." "Sarah, tell me this isn't true," she screamed, using the old nickname she'd had as a child before she'd insisted on being called Jessica. But Michael couldn't tell her that, because we all knew it was true. The evidence was spread across my coffee table like a roadmap of betrayal, and there was no explaining it away. "Robert," Linda said, her voice taking on the tone I recognized from 30 years of marriage, the tone she used when she was about to try to manage me, to smooth things over, to make the problem disappear. "You're upset, you're confused, but making wild accusations won't help anyone." "I'm not making accusations," I replied calmly. "I'm asking questions, simple, direct questions that deserve simple, direct answers." Michael finally spoke, his voice hoarse from the morning's ordeal. "Look, Dad, Robert, I know how this looks. But—" "Don't call me Dad," I interrupted, and the sharpness in my voice surprised even me. "Whatever you are to this family, Michael, you lost the right to call me Dad on Tuesday." Jessica gasped. "You can't just decide that. Michael is my husband. He's part of this family." I turned to look at my daughter, this young woman who had once sat on my lap and called me the best daddy in the world, who had run to me when she was frightened and trusted me to fix everything that was broken in her small world. "Jessica," I said gently, "family members don't betray each other the way your husband and mother have betrayed you and me." The words hit Jessica like physical blows. I could see her trying to process what I was really saying, trying to reconcile the people she trusted most with the accusations spreading across the coffee table in front of her. "This is insane," she whispered. "This whole thing is insane." But I could see doubt creeping into her expression, darkening her eyes. She was looking at Michael differently now, noting how he wouldn't meet her gaze, how he stood closer to Linda than to his own wife. "Before anyone says another word," I announced, reaching for the second folder, "there's something you all need to understand about your situation." I opened the folder and spread its contents across the coffee table, next to the phone records and assisted living brochures, bank statements, investment records, property deeds, all bearing my name and numbers that made Linda gasp audibly. "What is this?" she whispered, staring at a statement that showed an account balance of $1,700,000. "This is what you don't know about your husband," I said calmly. "This is what Michael doesn't know about his father-in-law. This is what Jessica doesn't know about the man she was planning to lock away in an assisted living facility." Michael leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. "Robert, what are these documents?" "These documents represent my inheritance from Uncle Edmund, $4,500,000, received 6 years ago and carefully invested ever since." I paused, letting that sink in. "My current net worth is approximately $6,200,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jessica's sobbing stopped as she tried to process what I had just revealed. Six million? Linda's voice was barely audible. 6.2 million, I corrected, plus ongoing investment growth. Jessica stared at me as if I had just announced I was an alien from another planet. "Dad, that's not possible. We live in this little house. You drive a 12-year-old Honda. You clip coupons from the Sunday paper." "I live modestly by choice, Jessica. I wanted to see what kind of people you all were when you thought I had nothing to offer but my pension and my love." I looked at each of them in turn. Now I know. The impact of this revelation was immediate and devastating. I could see the calculations running behind their eyes, the realization of what they had thrown away, what they had risked, what they had lost. Linda's face had gone from pale to ashen. 6 years. You've known about this money for 6 years and you never told me?" "I told you about the inheritance, Linda. I said Uncle Edmund left me a little something to set aside for retirement. You asked if it was enough for a cruise to Alaska. I didn't correct your assumption, and you never asked for details." "That money belongs to both of us," she said, her voice gaining strength as anger replaced shock. "We're married, community property." I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Actually, Linda, inheritance received by one spouse during marriage is considered separate property in this state, provided it's kept in separate accounts and not commingled with marital assets. I checked with an attorney years ago." Michael was staring at the documents, his mouth slightly open. "You're a millionaire." "Yes. And you let us think you were just some poor retiree living on a pension." "Yes. And now you're telling us because I want you to understand what you've lost, Michael." I turned to Linda. "You threw away a marriage to a man worth over $6 million so you could carry on an affair with a construction manager who makes $43,000 a year." Michael flinched as if I had slapped him. I looked at Jessica. "You conspired to have your millionaire father declared incompetent and locked away, believing you were dealing with a confused old man with limited resources." Jessica was shaking her head slowly, as if she could deny the reality of what was happening. "And Michael," I continued, "you destroyed your marriage to a woman who genuinely loved you, betrayed the trust of a man who welcomed you as a son, and threw away any chance of being included in a family fortune that could have changed your life forever." The three of them sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of their mistakes. But before I could continue, Jessica suddenly spoke, her voice breaking. "Dad, wait, please. I didn't know about Mom and Michael. I swear to God I didn't know." I pulled out the third folder. "Then explain these emails, Jessica." I spread them across the table, emails from Michael to Jessica, each one carefully crafted to paint a picture of a father losing his mind. "Your dad called me today, very aggressive. I'm worried about his mental state. Linda told me he's been forgetting things. We need to act before he hurts himself. I found this article about early onset dementia. Sound familiar?" Jessica's hands trembled as she read them. Michael told me. He said you were getting dangerous. He showed me articles about elder abuse and dementia. He said you'd threatened him over the phone, that Mom was afraid to be alone with you. She turned to Michael, tears streaming down her face. You used me? You used my love for my father to hurt him? Michael's silence was answer enough. How long? Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper as she turned to Linda. How long have you and Michael been? Linda's face crumpled. 14 months, she said quietly. 14 months. Jessica's voice was hollow. Our anniversary was last month. You gave me flowers. You told me you loved me. I do love you, Michael said miserably. But you love my mother too, Jessica finished. Yes. This is quite a revelation, a voice said from behind us. We all turned to see Detective Brooks standing in the doorway to the living room. Officer Martinez was beside him. I hadn't heard them come in. I'd been too focused on the confrontation unfolding in front of me. The door was open, Brooks said. We knocked, but no one answered. Detective, I said calmly, do you have that warrant? We do. He held up a folded document. Warrant to search the premises for industrial adhesive and related materials. Then by all means, search away. 20 minutes later, they found it. The industrial adhesive bottle in my garage, still with traces of the product inside, my fingerprints all over it. Brooks stood in my living room with the evidence bag in his hand. Robert Smith, you're under arrest for assault with a dangerous weapon. You have the right to remain silent. As he read me my Miranda rights, I saw Jessica's face go white. Linda looked almost relieved, as if my arrest somehow absolved her of her own guilt. Michael just looked confused, as if he couldn't understand how everything had spiraled so far out of control. Dad! Jessica cried as Brooks put the handcuffs on my wrists. It's all right, Jessica, I said calmly. Call Catherine Walsh. Her number is in my phone. Tell her what happened. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings. Catherine Walsh, the divorce attorney I'd already retained, brought in a colleague who specialized in criminal defense. Bail was set at $50,000. I wrote the check without blinking, shocking the bail bondsman who'd assumed I'd need financing. The district attorney, Thomas Wright, wanted to prosecute me for assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, but Catherine and her colleague negotiated hard. Psychological evaluation by Dr. Helen Park showed I wasn't a violent person, that this was an isolated incident in extreme emotional distress. Your Honor, my attorney argued, my client discovered his wife in flagrante delicto with his son-in-law. In a moment of profound shock and betrayal, he made an impulsive, regrettable decision. He did not intend serious harm. He thought it would merely cause embarrassment. The truth was more complicated than that, but I didn't contradict him. Eventually, we reached a plea deal. I pled guilty to reckless endangerment, a lesser charge. 6 months suspended sentence, 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service. I also had to pay Linda's and Michael's medical bills, $18,500. I accepted it. I deserved consequences for what I'd done, even if what they'd done was worse. The divorce proceedings happened simultaneously. Linda hired Paul Henderson, a competent attorney who specialized in contentious divorces. But even Henderson looked uncomfortable as Catherine methodically presented our evidence. Mrs. Smith committed adultery, Catherine stated during the settlement hearing. She conspired to have my client declared incompetent. She planned to institutionalize him against his will. Under these circumstances, she has forfeited any right to spousal support or a division of assets beyond what the law strictly requires. Judge Rebecca Thornton, a stern woman in her early 60s, reviewed the evidence with pursed lips. Mr. Smith's inheritance is clearly separate property. Mrs. Smith's conduct throughout this marriage has been deplorable. She looked at Linda over her reading glasses. You'll receive your personal belongings, your vehicle, and the current balance of the joint checking account. That's all. Linda left the marriage with $7,300, her Honda, and whatever clothes she could fit in her car. Everything else, the house, my pension, all my investments, remained mine. Jessica filed for divorce from Michael the same week. Michael had nothing to give her, no savings, no property, nothing but debt and a ruined reputation. 6 months after the divorces were finalized, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and pink. The house was everything my old suburban home wasn't, spacious, modern, and mine alone. Nestled on 15 acres in the Colorado Rockies, 2 hours outside Denver, it represented the life I had always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. I'd paid $800,000 in cash, shocking the real estate agent. Another $200,000 in renovations had created exactly the sanctuary I wanted. Jessica lived here too, in a converted guest cottage on the far side of the property. The physical distance had helped us rebuild our relationship slowly, carefully, without the pressure of forced intimacy. She had a job at a veterinary clinic in the nearest town and was halfway through her first semester of pre-veterinary studies at Colorado State University. I'd loaned her the money for tuition, low interest, reasonable repayment terms. "You need to prove to yourself that you can succeed on your own merits," I'd told her. "But you shouldn't be punished forever for someone else's manipulation." Our relationship was different now, better in many ways. Jessica treated me with genuine respect, and I had learned to see her as an adult who had made mistakes rather than a child who needed protecting. My own life had transformed in ways I hadn't expected. I'd taken up photography, and the mountains provided endless subjects. I'd sold several prints to a gallery in Denver, not because I needed the money, but because it felt good to have my work valued. I volunteered at a wildlife rehabilitation center, using my organizational skills to help them run more efficiently. I'd made friends with neighbors, other retirees who'd moved to the mountains for peace and beauty. We gathered for dinner parties and hiking trips, and I found myself laughing more than I had in years. One of my neighbors, Patricia Morgan, a 65-year-old widow, had become a particularly close friend. Our relationship was platonic but comfortable, and I appreciated having someone to share my new life with. "You seem at peace," Patricia had observed during one of our photography walks. "I am," I'd realized with some surprise. "For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I want to be." I'd run into Linda exactly once since the divorce, at the post office in our old town where I'd gone to handle some remaining business. She looked tired and older than her 59 years. Her hair showed gray roots she hadn't bothered to touch up. Her clothes were practical rather than flattering, the clothes of someone who worked 60 hours a week just to make ends meet. "Robert," she'd said, clearly startled to see me, "I heard you moved to Colorado." I did. "And Jessica's with you?" "She is." Linda had stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to proceed. Finally, she'd asked, "Are you happy?" The question surprised me. "Yes," I said honestly. "I am. Are you?" She'd considered the question seriously before answering. "No, I thought I would be, but no, Michael and we broke up 2 weeks ago." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you really?" I'd thought about it. "Yes, I am. I never wanted you to be miserable, Linda. I just wanted you to face the consequences of your choices." "I think about what I gave up," she'd said quietly. "About what we had before everything went wrong." "What we had wasn't perfect either," I'd pointed out. "You said so yourself. We'd grown comfortable, maybe too comfortable." "But it was real," Linda said. "What Michael and I had, it felt real at the time, but it was built on lies and excitement and the thrill of doing something forbidden. Once the excitement was gone..." She'd trailed off, but I understood. "Linda," I'd said gently, "you can build a new life. You're 59 years old, not 99. You have time to figure out what really makes you happy." She'd nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Maybe. But I've lost so much." "We both have," I'd said. "But we can't change what's happened. We can only choose what comes next." Now, standing in my mountain kitchen 6 months later, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of my real life, the life I was meant to live once I stopped accepting less than I deserved. The old Robert Smith would have endured Linda's affair in silence, would have accepted the narrative that he was becoming incompetent, would have allowed himself to be placed in assisted living while his family destroyed itself with secrets and betrayals. This Robert Smith had fought back, had demanded respect, had refused to be a victim of other people's choices. And in standing up for himself, he had not only reclaimed his own dignity, but had also given his daughter the opportunity to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. Jessica had said to me just last week during one of our dinners together, "Dad, I understand now what you did for me. Not just financially, but emotionally. You could have cut me off completely, and you would have been justified. But you made me prove I'd learned from my mistakes. You made me rebuild independently before you offered to help. That took wisdom I didn't appreciate at the time. Those words had meant more to me than she could possibly know. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside onto my deck, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. An eagle circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. This was freedom. This was peace. This was the life I had earned by refusing to accept anything less than the truth, no matter how much that truth had cost me. For the first time in 30 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The wounds weren't completely healed. Perhaps they never would be. There were still nights when I lay awake thinking about what might have been if Linda had simply been honest, if we'd worked on our marriage instead of letting it die slowly through neglect and routine. But I'd learned something unexpected about myself. I was happier alone than I had been in an unhappy marriage. The solitude I'd feared had turned out to be peaceful rather than lonely. And that, I thought, as I watched the sun complete its transformation of the mountain landscape, was perhaps the most important lesson of all. Not every ending is happy. Not every wound heals perfectly. But life goes on, and sometimes the person you become after betrayal is stronger, wiser, and more authentically yourself than the person you were before. I raised my coffee cup to the mountains, to the new day, to the second chance I'd given myself. "Here's to starting over," I said aloud to no one but the eagles and the wind. And somewhere in the distance, as if in answer, the mountains echoed back,